I gotta say that what I believe our deepest and most powerful shared currency is our story, our most authentic, real, deep, revealing story. And what I found over the last, 7 years at this point of creating and sharing a documentary that chronicles my own very real process and story is that so many people are terrified of speaking into their truth, of speaking into their darkness, of speaking into areas of their life where they are walking with questions. And I think that's really interesting. I think for a very long time, the content we consumed, the people we were around, the way that we were educated didn't necessarily foster asking questions. Like, yes, the Jewish wisdom tradition, it really covets asking questions. Passover is all about questions. Really, generally, learning is all about questions. But we were so afraid, and I saw it growing up, to really own our questions. And I think if I reflect into my own experience of what is it to have a question and why could it potentially be so confronting and uncomfortable for people to have them, it's because it shows our own vulnerability. It shows that we have areas in our own lives that maybe we don't know everything. And that's pretty confronting. That's pretty tough to own and claim and wear every single day, especially in a world that's all about being perfect, that's all about having it figured out, and that's all about success. So I feel like before I get into what I think is the real magic of creating content and of really owning our questions in the content that we create. And by the way, when I say content, that doesn't mean, you get to check out if you're not a content creator of some sort. I'm not a writer, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm not a social media influencer, like this doesn't apply to me. We all create content. Every single day of our life, the way in which we present, the things that we share, the relationships we have, that is our content. That's our shared currency. That's our personal story. That's the way that we present ourselves, our narrative, and who we are. So we're constantly creating content. We're constantly sharing. And so I think there's a real magic to owning that process, to honing that process, and to double clicking deeper into it. And we'll get into like what I believe the magic of it all really is. I don't think it's what we think it is. But before I do that, I want to share a little bit about my story. Because I think in doing so, it'll potentially inspire you. It will for sure inform you a little bit about my own process and why I'm talking at all and who I am if you don't know who I am. And it'll lead into that second part. So hi, I'm Becky, but Becky is actually the name I made up in 4th grade. I'm Tahel. Tahel is my Hebrew name. I was born in Haifa, raised by two very bold humans. My dad's a Russian Israeli raised by Holocaust survivors. My mom is a Moroccan Israeli raised by devout traditional Moroccans who emigrated to Israel to escape religious persecution. And I moved to Philadelphia when I was just about 7. And that's where my dueling identities began. Their ever-present fight. Was I Israeli? Am I American? Like, what? There's so many aspects of myself that I had to reconcile as a Jew in America, as an Israeli in America, as an Israeli American who's creative, born to immigrant parents, trying to make it in America. There's a lot. And I'm sure if you're an immigrant, you understand that narrative. If you're Israeli in America, you understand that narrative. If you're a Jew in America, you also likely have your own experience of that narrative as well. Growing up, we all have our difficulties. And after college, I decided I'd take my shot at LA. It was like Los Angeles was the pinnacle of creativity in my mind, the open frontier to becoming and manifesting the real narrative of my dreams. And to me, that was being a creative, stepping into and manifesting creativity. I'd always written, I'd always performed, I did musical theater and competitive singing and the girls speaking contest at my school. And I really loved creating and expressing on stage. But more than that, I really appreciated that dialogue with an audience. My first experience of somebody coming up to me after a show and saying, wow, that performance really inspired me, was like a drug. I was like, I want to inspire. Like, I want to have that. So as I navigated Los Angeles in an effort to chase that dream that yummy feeling of inspiring and connecting with an audience, I was met with many hardships. And I think it's just it's not LA. LA has its own hardships, but beyond that, there's such a depth and a breadth to the creative journey, and it's not all ups, and it is often downs, but that's also just the journey of being a human on this earth, and that's okay. Now, at some point in my journey, as I was trying to make it, auditioning, I noticed a trend. I would often go out for like the Jewish best friend or the next door neighbor. I went out for the role of Mitch Maisel. And I was like, I'm noticing a trend that I'm being cast as like either the Jewish or the quirky best friend. Like, what is that saying about my identity? Who am I? And I knew I always felt very Jewish. But I hadn't really explored what that meant to me. And it's in its specificity. Like, what was my brand of Jew? It also wasn't like the sexiest thing to explore for me at the time. I was in my 20s, focused on, paying rent and maybe getting a role on a sitcom, which I did once for half of a second. At some point after another failed audition, I sat down in my car and I thought to myself, okay, I can't keep doing the thing that's not fulfilling. I don't mind auditioning, but I know I'm meant for something more. And that whisper spoke. Something was calling me. I felt like there was something I was being called to answer. And that question, the initial question way back then was, what is your purpose? What is your North Star? Where are you going? Where are you headed? And at that point, I couldn't necessarily answer that question. I knew I was like headed toward some sort of vague, blurry dream that felt like fun, creative self-expression. But on the day-to-day, I wasn't living it. And it certainly wasn't manifesting. So apparently, and it definitely wasn't filling up my bank account. So what was I doing? And that question brought in an idea. And I speak that moment, and I remember where I was in my car right after another failed audition, where the idea came. And an incredible author who I'm a big fan of, and if you haven't heard of her or read this book, you should. Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book called Big Magic. And in this book, she posits that ideas live in creative limbo, in some sort of, potential state. And they look down for host bodies willing to bring them down and carry them through. And I felt like in that moment, I have chills every time I really think about it and really share it. In that moment, I felt like this idea came in and was like, knock, knock. Hey, here I am. What are you doing? Like, do you want to manifest me? And that idea was a pretty brave one, I'd say, now that I look back, but back then I was pretty naive, is exploring interfaith marriage within the Jewish experience. Like super light topic, not so sexy either. But why? Why that one specifically? At the time that I had mentioned in my 20s, of course, I was dating, whatever. Like, I wasn't very clear on who I was or what sort of partner I wanted. And it was my 20s in LA. Like, I didn't feel like I needed to be. But at the time that I'm experiencing this very real crisis of who am I and what is my North Star, my sister gets married to a non-Jew. Well, they got engaged first and then married. And that opened up a humongous can of worms for me because I was very bumped by it. Like I didn't immediately celebrate, and that felt wrong on so many levels to me. I also didn't have language around my feelings, around the experience of being bumped and why I was bumped and how I was going to engage with this bump. And that was also very a big crisis wrapped up in a lot of not knowing. And I felt like I probably wasn't the only one. Now, the reason in that moment I feel like maybe that big magic moment happened was because I also opened a desire to create more authentic content. And this goes way back to the beginning when I said right at the top that our deepest and most valuable shared currency is our most authentic and brave story. And I stand by that. Because in that moment, I think because I was desiring to find my most valuable currency, my North Star, my most fulfilling path to take, I wanted it to be bigger, I wanted it to be richer, and I wanted it to be vulnerable. And then I realized, well, this is really vulnerable because I don't actually have the answer to this question. And just like I mentioned in the beginning, we're not encouraged to have unanswered questions. Because I think for our parents' generation, or maybe just academia in general, the way we were brought up, that an unanswered question is failed information. It's failed teaching. And that's not good, right? We got to fill that question with an answer immediately, and it better be the right one. And there's really only one right one, right? So in that moment, I knew that I was walking with a lot of ambiguity and curiosity, and that would be tricky and brave. But I felt like that would be a really lovely piece of content to create. So there I went. That was 7 years ago. Flash forward to 2 years into the process. I'd created a documentary and was in the process of creating a documentary that was asking this question of why marry Jewish? And by the way, the question didn't start out that clear. It was like, why am I feeling weird about my sister getting engaged to a non-Jew? And then it was like, what's the deal with interfaith marriage? Like, I didn't really even have the succinct ask, but I was walking in the direction of the question. Over the years of asking and asking and asking, the question clarified itself, and then it stuck. What I'm asking is, after sort of bumping around, is why marry Jewish? Like, why is that important? So after 2.5 years of walking with that question, I was met with what I believe is the real nature of asking questions, the deeper layer. Like, there's like a surface question, and then there's a bunch of other layers within the question just waiting to be birthed. And I hit that next layer for me. I was connected to a fantastic author a writer. I don't consider himself an author, a writer in LA. I took a meeting, took the elevator up to his office. I was very nervous, very excited. He wrote on many big shows. And I sat in his office, and I thought like he was going to give me some really powerful feedback because he took the meeting. So clearly I'm an important person, right? Like, he's giving me a whole hour of his time. And he sat and mostly encouraged me to do something different about my film. He's like, yeah, what you have is cool. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's not what I thought. I was definitely expecting you to be a little bit more excited about my budding documentary. I said, no, I think there's potential. Hate that word. But there's something deeper here. Are you willing to dig? Are you going to dig? And that ask, of course, was a tiny micro question within my bigger question of the biggest question of what am I doing with my life? What is my North Star? What is my journey? What is my purpose? And what is this piece of content? And how is this going to lead me into the next iteration of myself? So when he asked me, what's the deeper story here? I was answering many questions. It was very layered. It is that layered. And I realized that the deeper question within why marry Jewish was, why be Jewish? Like, why be this thing at all? Because if I could, I knew that if I could explore what that question begged me to explore, which was my deeper identity, my dueling identities, all the stuff that I mentioned, I brought with me from birth to growing up in Israel, to moving to Philadelphia, to then moving out to California, then to moving throughout California and LA and figuring out who I am, that it would help me to reconcile it all. There's a deeper question, why be Jewish? What is my identity? Who am I? Why am I uniquely me within the Jewish container? And what does that look like? How do I present as Jewish? So to me, that obvious next step was go to Israel. And I don't want to give my whole film away because I made a 66-minute documentary that chronicles this entire journey from beginning to not end, but to just about a couple years ago, where there was a sort of what felt like a nice conclusion. And I hope you watch it. And if you don't have 66 minutes to spare, I hope you watch at least the trailer to get a sense of it. But the reason I talk about owning your authentic story and stepping into and walking with questions is because none of where I am today and who I am today would have happened if I didn't walk with the question, who am I? Then why marry Jewish? And then why be Jewish? Which led me right back to answering who am I? And I think that if we all were able to really own our big questions, that we could have life-changing, momentous, mega shifts in our life, but there's a couple things stopping us. And look, like, everyone's unique. I can't say what is your hang up with asking a question. Could it be the way that you were, indoctrinated to believe that learning looks like it's linear and you are given the information, and asking a question means that you're admitting some sort of defeat or a lack of perfection or lack of intelligence? Maybe. That's why I never asked a question in class. I was always too terrified of how the words would sound coming out of my mouth and how dumb people thought I would be by asking that question. So maybe that's the hang up. Well, I don't want to admit that I don't know, so I'm just not going to ask. And what I'd say about that is that, as we see, the best and most meaningful relationships we have are when we are really expressing from our heart. And I think our heart, just connected to our emotions, our feelings, our deepest core sense of self, and our deepest expression of self, it comes from a really vulnerable place. Up here is like protected, and it's intellectual, so it's got it all figured out. It's logical and masterful, and it's all the things with a nice little bow. But when you drop into the heart, it can be a little messy. It can be a little confused. It can admit defeat. It can lean into curiosity and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. And the invitation that there's you and others when you say, I have no idea, is massive. It's massive. Suddenly people go, okay, well, there's an opening here for a reciprocal sort of relationship of growth, right? The person that says, I got it all figured out, you sort of feel like a door's been closed. But and by the way, with yourself too, if I have it all figured out, there's no desire for wisdom to continue to seep into my pores. But if I go, oh, God, I don't know, show me. In every moment, we talk about a beginner's mindset. That is moment by moment being open to knowing absolutely nothing. Because what do we really know? And yes, we know a lot of things. And look, there's this interesting duality about learning, because my documentary chronicles a very real academic approach to Judaism. I create a to-do list and I mark all the areas of my Jewish, lack of curriculum that I want to create and learn about. And I go and I learn, and I sit in classrooms and I talk to professors and teachers and experts and people living their, Jewish self-expressed lives. And I learned, and it was very academic. And I think that is a part of it. But where we try to skip steps and where we forget to pay attention is in the integration, is in letting all of that come down into our hearts. Yes, I learned this. Yes, I know. I'm a knower of things. I'm good. I am smart. But now I'm going to be open to what that looks like on me. And maybe yesterday looks a little bit different than today. And how cool, or what does that mean? Today we do that with our emotions. We have a weird day. I had a funky day today. I feel strange. I wonder what happened. So being in that inquiry, especially with our Jewish identity, is the most important work that we can do. And so often we just don't do it. We leave it for later. We leave it for last. But when are we going to take care of ourselves? When are we going to step into who we are and really explore every corner of our Jewish identity? That, for me, was the process of making my film. And that, for me, is what I believe is the power of creating content. Now, to the point, and this will be sort of the crux of what I was mentioning earlier of content, is that don't tune out because you think I don't make content. I'm not a filmmaker. I'm not a musician. I'm not a writer. I'm not really creative. I don't make content. So this doesn't apply to me. We all make content. As I mentioned, we all have relationships. We all express and present ourselves every day. Even if just to ourselves in the mirror, we are creating content. Every single moment of our life is a creation of content. Some people decide to document it. Some people are crazy enough to have cameras rolling and, to create a movie out of it. And that's not a necessity. But I think if we all approached our life as the wonderful writing of our own documentary journey, our own movie. And not the fantastical kind where you can fly and have magical powers. There's probably room for that, but I'm not talking about that movie. I'm talking about the nonfiction one. The one that is wholly you, that expresses your story in an hour. What does that story look like? What does that piece of content feel like? How does it communicate with the audience? And so my homework to you, if you choose to accept the mission of trying to figure out what it might be to create the movie of your life, is to outline what a documentary might be. A documentary that is the story of you. Act 1, 2, and 3, beginning, middle, and end. The first question, what sets it off, the fun and games that ensue, and the resolution. And that doesn't mean that you got to figure it out later, or that it's got to cover your entire life. Maybe it only focuses on a sliver in time. Maybe right now you're going through something really transformative, or really interesting, or really trying, or really confusing. I think the deepest experiences we have are the ones that confuse us, the one that thrust us into the center of the twister that is a bunch of questions that are unanswered. To have the bravery in that moment to go, okay, let me take a step back. I'm in the movie of my life. I am co-creating an experience with a bigger, more divine power than me. God is, and I had this very real experience while making the documentary of this very real fact, that this is God's movie. This is God creating through me. So let us be co-creative partners. Let me be the producer. Let me direct the movie let me produce the movie that God is directing. And so if we can find a deeper purpose and a bigger call, we can write this movie in a more empowered way. But let's say you don't believe in God, or you're not sure, or your relationship with God's a little funky today. Do it for you. Do it to experience the process that I believe creating a documentary film, nonfiction film is. I believe documentary filmmaking is self-development disguised by the art of making a film. So what I did over 7 years was not just make a film. I changed myself. I confronted my biggest questions. I was forced to push past the hardest moments. And even in post-production, after 150 hours of footage, I was forced yet again to confront the toughest task of shaping and carving and perfecting this movie, to tell a story that I felt could inspire and move an audience. To make a piece of content and really to do our work on this earth is self-development disguised by the process of creating, by the process of being an accountant, by the process of being an attorney. Like, we all have work that we do, but really that work is just a vehicle for us to learn and grow and develop. And I think, and again, creative or not, that the deepest work that we can do is to lean into our own story and to create from it so we can inspire others. I mean, the most impactful speakers that I've had the pleasure to listen to were ones who had really impressive and deep stories, who moved me with their own experiences, and who spoke of things that resonated with me. And I think my experience in touring this film, and I just came back from Birmingham, Alabama, and their Jewish community was so impressive, small and very impressive. I did not know there were Jews in Alabama. I'm very pleasantly surprised to be invited and to have co-created such a really powerful event with that community. But what I realized as I spoke to the group was that the fear I had of speaking to groups, which came with the birth of this documentary and the beginnings of invitations to speak on its behalf, that fear was really misguided. I felt like in the beginning of my speaking journey, well, why me? Like, why listen to me? I'm not an expert. I don't know enough. And there goes again that little voice that says, don't ask that question. You're going to sound dumb. You got to know it all. You better show up with all the information. You better not have questions. When really my entire platform is walking with questions, is stepping into and owning our vulnerability, because the question is the vessel. Until we ask, we cannot receive answers. We might think we can. We might say like, well, I don't know, like I'm just hoping that I figure it out. But like, do you have a question? Even if it's messy, even if it's kind of a vaguely asked question, are you asking? Are you asking something? What are you asking? So this is an invitation to, if you're like, don't know if I want to make an entire documentary outline at this moment, which is actually a really wonderful exercise. And I'm facilitating it right now with a couple different individuals that I'm working with, and it's really transformative. Whether you want to make a film about something in particular and you want to grow through the process of making that film, or whether you want to grow as an individual and you want to figure out what the story of your life is and how to formulate that as something meaningful to share. But beyond that, I think we all have something that we can own and step into and ask the questions around. And so it could just be clarifying a question right now. And I remember when my mom, who, by the way, funny, should have, mentioned this right at the top, is a Jewish education teacher, Jewish studies teacher, would always tell me, ask questions you don't know, so ask me. And I was like the Passover Seder kid, the one who doesn't know how to ask, because I knew, like, I had the experience of curiosity and I had the experience of confusion. So I knew I needed clarity and I knew I needed to ask questions, but I didn't even really know where to start. And in saying that, I want to encourage all of us that if there are areas in our lives where we just don't know where to start asking the question, I know I want to get there, but like, I'm not even really sure what question to ask, to start and let it be messy. Let the question be, I don't know, like, why do I feel like this? And even just saying like, why do I feel like this? Then you can start asking the why and the why and the why and the why and the why. Why am I feeling like this? Well, where, what's this? When do I feel like this most? I guess I feel like this most when I am, and then you can answer those questions for yourself and start digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the question until it clarifies. And you'll know, I feel like there's a very real sort of, yeah, that feels like the right question, at least for right now. And what's right to you, something that feels like it really lands in your heart. Okay, let's walk with that question. What's the worst that can happen? You walk with it for a week. You're like, nothing really. But I did have an insight. In asking this question for a week, I think I'm really asking a different question. Let me try that question out for next week. The exercise of walking with questions and asking different questions allows us, one, to normalize for ourselves the process. We walk with questions. You don't have to answer it right now. Yes, I know there's like a real urgency of like needing to fill the silence. You know what it's like when you're sitting in the car with someone and they're not talking. You're like, well, better make small talk. This is awkward. Like, be okay sitting in a car, just chilling with yourself. Be okay just sitting in the silence of your own ambiguity, of your own confusion. Just be okay. Because in that silence is your true self just whispering. There's a beautiful line in my movie that Rav Daniel Katz shares. And he encourages, I remember he was like, I encourage us all to, when you hear that whisper, don't you dare bury it. And we all hear the whisper. Well, we don't all hear the whisper. We all have the whisper. We don't all hear it because life gets loud and we get louder, often to bury the question, often to bury the whisper. And oftentimes just to make ends meet, we're trying to survive. Like, what do you want from me? I got to feed kids and I got to work and I got to pay rent. I live in LA. It's expensive. I got a lot to do. I have my boss breathing down my neck. I get it. We're all busy. But the real North Star is the who are we, is the why are we, is the depths of our Jewish identity, is our purpose here. And I believe that really comes down, our life mission comes down to exploring our Jewish identity and to figuring out what letter in the Torah are you? What shade of Jew are you? What Jewish expression are you willing to embody and step into and live out so that you can inspire others and yourself in the world? To get there, to answer the question of what letter in the Torah are you, you got to start asking questions and bump into them. Walk around a bit, take a little extra, find others to walk with you on the path to answering the question, and be willing to risk answering the question, because it is risky. The answer might not be what you wanted. The answer might force you to go to Israel, take time off from Hollywood, and learn Torah. Not what I thought I'd be doing, not who I thought I'd become. My movie and my journey, Walking with Questions, changed my life. I owe everything I am to this movie, but beyond that, I owe it to the director, to God. And I know we all have movies within us. We all have creative entities that are dropping down moment by moment, asking for us to walk with them and manifest them. And I hope you heed the call. I hope you listen. I hope that you take the questions that come to you, that you listen to the whispers that beg you to dig deeper and ask, and then risk answering, and that you go all the way, because it's worth it. You're worth it. You're worth the life-changing experience of walking with questions. I hope that you feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always available. AmericanBirthrightFilm.com is where you can view and rent the film in its entirety. And again, find your letter in the Torah. Own your Jewish expression. It is your North Star and the real, most fulfilling aspect of your life. I hope we all become encouraged and excited and passionate about that journey. And if you need a little bit of, excuse me as I get very excited, if you need a little bit of extra oomph or excitement, I'm here to be your cheerleader in the sidelines, but really create and approach this like you're making your own movie. Own it. You deserve it.